And then after we do the introductions, you could just get a little bit.
I'll play something.
Yeah.
I'll just play something short. Talk amongst yourselves.
Good evening, one and all. Thank you for coming out tonight to hear a true story entitled Wait for Me in the Library, an Alimony Melodrama.
The story you're about to hear features westward expansion, love, philandering, promises made, promises broken, and courtroom mayhem.
Order, order.
My name is Martha,
My name is Rick, and we are your hosts for tonight's melodrama.
and we're very excited that this evening David is joining us. On Monday morning, February 18th, 1924, newlyweds Wallace and Ethel left their rented rooms in Lincoln, Nebraska shortly before 8 a.m. The couple parted on the sidewalk, as he had told her he would later join her at the city library. About a half an hour later, Wallace met her there, and the couple went to Harley's drugstore, located on 11th and O Streets, where Wallace made a phone call to his sister. Afterwards, they returned to the library together, where Wallace said to Ethel,
Now you wait for me here while I go to my court hearing. It shouldn't be long.
Wallace never returned to the library or to Ethel. Story, though, begins in northern Illinois in 1860. Wallace Grant Wallach was born in Oakbound, Illinois, to Abraham and Mary on July 26th of 1865. The Wallachs left for Nebraska when Wallace was around 3 years old. Towards the end of their journey, they camped for the night on the banks of the Salt Creek, where settlers first came to extract salt from the wild salt flats there, and where the city of Lincoln now stands. In August of that year, they had settled on a homestead in Seward County, Nebraska, where Wallace's mother, Mary, died shortly afterwards. Wallace was one of the sturdy pioneers who grew up with our country and helped make the West what it is today. He withstood all the hardships of frontier life. At age 22, he married Melinda, rector on October 30th, 1887, in Washington County, Colorado. The bride was 18 years old. Their first son, Charles Henry, was born there in Colorado in 1891, and about a year later, the young family moved to Beaver City, Nebraska, where their second son, Wallace Roy, was born. Within a couple of years, the small family had relocated to the growing city of Lincoln, Nebraska. Nebraska was granted statehood in 1867. Soon afterwards, a state commission was tasked with finding a location for its seat of government. The village of Lancaster was chosen for the capital of Nebraska, which was later named Lincoln after the 16th president. The first Capitol building was completed in 1868, and the city was incorporated on April 1st, 1869.
What an exciting time to be in Lincoln. It sounds like a rapidly growing city.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. It must have been something to see it grow, because by 1870, the railroads had been using it as a stopping site, and all railroads that were going east, west, south, or north used Lincoln. By 1911, there was a major highway was established through Lincoln, and then by 1920, they got their first airfield. Transportation linked Lincoln, Nebraska to all parts of the country, north, south, east, and west. And the population grew to 54,948 by 1920.
Wow.
It's actually around 300,000 right now.
Wallace found good work in the city and supported his family as a tunnel and well digger and house mover.
Later, in 1924, hardware store owner Carl Green recalls the following.
I saw Wallach often in my store on O Street. He was a decent appearing man who moved houses. One time he came into my store through the back way and was talking in a real irrational manner. He said that he'd been involved in a house moving over in Wyoming and had been asked to do an important job at Walton. Wait a minute, where's Walton?
Walton is about 7 miles east of Lincoln, I think.
He said his work consisted of moving the whole town to make room for a playground.
What?
I know, right?
That's kind of crazy.
He seemed almost half asleep and was so fantastic in his ideas that I knew at once that something must be the matter with him. Wallach also had the reputation of being slow to pay his bills. Kind of a deadbeat, in fact.
By 1910, Wallace and Melinda owned a small house at 934 Benton Street. The little bungalow still stands there today. The couple by then had 6 children, 4 boys, Charles, Wallace Roy, Raymond, and Emmett. And then their 2 youngest children were girls, Edna Mae and Alice. By 1923, the boys had all married, but they all lived close by, except for Wallace Roy, who had moved to Los Angeles with his family. But the 2 youngest, Edna Mae and Alice, still lived in the home.
Sounds like a nice family and a good life, but I suppose appearances can be deceiving.
Well, we all know that we're all here for a reason, and this story's not going to turn out good, right? For some time, Wallace and Melinda's marriage was plagued by violence. For her part, Melinda had a sharp tongue, and she belittled Wallace at every opportunity she could. Far from being innocent himself, Wallace once held a gun to his wife's head during a heated argument. On another occasion, it was said that he choked her and threw her to the ground.
Wow, this is much worse than I thought.
Indeed. Melinda filed for divorce from Wallace in district court on April 25th, 1923. They've been married almost 36 years. In the divorce filing, Melinda charged Wallace with extreme cruelty and infidelity. On May 25th of that year, Wallace, through his attorneys, Burkett and Wilson Brown, filed a counter motion asking that Melinda clarify her charges that were in the original petition. Melinda responded with a demand for a reasonable allowance of alimony and child support, along with a clear account of Wallace's offenses.
So tell me more. What was the nature of these offenses?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because Melinda did not hold back in her counter motion. It went on to say that Wallace was a longtime cheater and had been holding secret meetings with one Charlotte Bauman since the later part of 1917. Melinda went on to say in the petition that Wallace beat her and treated her with violence. On one occasion when they were fighting because of his attentions to that Bauman woman, Melinda claimed that Wallace had struck her in the face and grabbed her by the throat and threatened to kill her.
I wish you were dead, Melinda.
To everyone's great relief, their divorce was granted on July 3rd, 1923. Under the terms of the decree, Wallace was ordered to pay $25 a month for the support of each minor child and pay the $100 attorney fee.
Remember, this was 1924, and $150 is equivalent in purchasing power to about $2,805 in 2025. This was a king's ransom for a well digger.
A lot of money, yeah. So after the divorce, Wallace traveled to Colorado, where he had friends and family. His aim was to start a new life, but he often found himself returning to his old stomping grounds in Nebraska. Melinda and her two younger children, Edna Mae, who was 17 at the time, and Alice, who was 14, continued to live in the tiny family home there in Lincoln.
Good riddance, I say. So that's the end of the story, right?
Well, not by a long shot. No pun or dramatic foreshadowing intended. In the months after the divorce, Melinda had to file 2 affidavits documenting Wallace's failure to make support payments, with the result that he showed cause for non-payment. After many months without financial support, Melinda was compelled to return to court again in order to enforce their divorce decree. On October 23rd, 1923, Judge William M. Morning, a well-loved judge serving his second term on the district court bench, committed Wallace to jail for contempt of court and non-payment of alimony and child support. Wallace served only 4 days in jail, but he was released when his sister paid the fines.
William Morning, the judge who jailed Wallace, was a native of Pennsylvania. He was born and raised on a farm and received a country education. From the age of 19 to 20, he taught school while studying law. In 1886, he began practicing law. Later, he served as a county attorney for 1 year. In 1921, Judge Morning served as Nebraska State Bar president. He lived a good life with his second wife, Grace, and his daughter, Mildred, a child by his first wife, who had passed away in 1913. Judge Morning was highly respected by other attorneys in the city of Lincoln. He was only 56 years old when he crossed paths with Wallace Wallach.
On January 19th or 29th, 1924, we found when we were doing research that newspapers had conflicting dates, so we're not sure which. Wallace remarried an Ethel Mary Hanson in Council Bluffs, Iowa. The marriage certificate lists the 61-year-old woman's address as Anders, New York, and Wallace's address is Yuma, Colorado. Some people believe that Wallace had turned over a new leaf, but far from being a changed man, Wallace had told his brother-in-law, Everett, the following.
I don't care what they do to me. That sharp-tongued old shrew will never get any of my money. So, what lengths do you think Wallace will go to keep Melinda from getting his money? I mean, what do you think he's capable of?
Well, I don't think it's gonna turn out good because I read reports in the newspapers at that time that Everett, his brother-in-law, reported that he used to carry a gun with him at all times. So Wallace continued his refusal to support Melinda and their minor children, and she once again had to take him to court. Wallace was again cited for contempt of court and non-payment of alimony. Hence, Judge Morning summoned Wallace to appear before the Court of Domestic Relations in Lincoln on Monday, February 18th.
So that summons brings Wallace back to Lincoln, or was he already there?
Well, we're not really sure of the timing because there's conflicting reports in the newspapers that we found. And remember, he had just gotten married in Iowa about a month ago. So from what we can figure out, he and his new bride went to Lincoln sometime after the wedding.
Wallace and Ethel, his new bride, had taken a room in a boarding house run by Mrs. E.G. McKee on L Street. Oddly, they registered under the name of Wallace Grant. Wouldn't Ethel have questioned him about the alias?
Yeah, he used his middle name as his last name. You'd think she would have questioned it.
On Saturday, 2 days before Wallace's court date, he went to the courthouse and sat quietly all day in Judge Morning's courtroom. The presence of Wallace was unusual as there were no cases heard that day. Wallace sat stoically in the practically empty courtroom during the day. During that time, he must have been alone with Judge Morning several times, but we don't know if the men spoke to each other. Newspaper reporters sat and chatted with the judge at the attorney's table for perhaps half an hour during the morning. Wallace was silent the entire time.
And now, a commercial break from one of our sponsors.
The Gays Mills Library is one of 3 public libraries in Crawford County, Wisconsin. Our beautiful library is nestled along the banks of the Kickapoo River. We strive to serve the recreational, cultural, and informational needs of our residents and visitors with a wide variety of materials. Big windows with beautiful views invite lingering over a magazine or puzzle. Broadband internet access throughout the library meets the needs of a rural population for social connection and information. Visit us soon and visit us often at the Gays Mills Public Library.
Thank you, David. So let me set the scene for you in the courtroom that morning of February 18th, 1924. Present was Judge Morning, A.A. Lang, the bailiff, Minor S. Bacon, the court reporter, Cyril Combs, who was the investigator for the Court of Domestic Relations, Clifford S. Rain, who was Melinda's attorney, Melinda, of course, her daughter Edna Mae near her son Charles, and Melinda's brother Everett, along with various reporters, spectators, and of course other attorneys who were there to observe or were just waiting for their cases to be heard.
Are you ready for trial?
Judge Morning asked Wallace.
Yes.
Wallace replied.
Have you an attorney? No.
Replied Wallace.
Then take a seat and we will proceed.
But Wallace did not sit down. He fumbled in the inside pocket of his coat, finally bringing out a bunch of papers, which he began to lay on the judge's desk While fumbling with the papers, his right hand slowly crept back towards his hip pocket. As he laid the papers on the desk, he suddenly jerked a gun from his pocket, held it at arm's length, and taking aim, shot the judge, hitting him just above the heart. Wallace then spun and leveled the gun at Minor Bacon and fired a shot directly at his chest. Whirling around, Wallace faced the spectators, and then he fired a shot across the courtroom directly at Melinda. Melinda was sitting with her attorney, her son, her daughter, and her brother. They all scrambled for cover. Screaming spectators fled the room out into the hall.
Have you had enough?
Wallace yelled as he turned back towards Minor.
Yes.
Minor cried out. Wallace then pulled out another .38 revolver from his pocket, stuck the muzzle into his mouth, and pulled the trigger. He collapsed on the courtroom floor, dead.
On the blue steel gun that Wallach aimed at Judge Morning,
said attorney A.P. Schwartz, who was sitting about 7 or 8 feet away from Wallace when he fired the fatal shot.
That man took deliberate aim.
J.C. McReynolds, an attorney who was in court at the time of the shooting, was sitting on the north side of the room about 8 feet from Wallace. Mr. McReynolds rushed out into the hall to notify the sheriff's office, where he passed Sheriff Longstretch, rushing towards the sound of the gunshots. Later, McReynolds reported that 3 shots were fired within a period of about 5 seconds. While in the hall, McReynolds said that's when he heard the 4th gunshot. As the shooting began, people in the courtroom rushed for the doors and tried to run out into the hall, screaming with fright. Deputy sheriffs attempting to gain entry into the courtroom were unable to do so at first because of the crowd jamming the doors and trying to get out of the courtroom. Upon being shot, Judge Morning swayed in his chair and with great effort rose to his feet and staggered into his private office located behind his desk.
Call John Ledworth.
The judge gasped to Cyril Combs. Ledworth was Judge Morning's former law partner. When the deputies were finally able to enter the courtroom, they saw Wallace lying on the floor in a pool of blood.
Before reaching the couch in his private office, the judge collapsed partially on it. Bailiff A.A. Lang lifted the judge onto the couch, where Judge Morning lost consciousness while blood gushed from his mouth. He gasped for air. Doctors were called immediately to the scene, but nothing could be done. Judge Morning was pronounced dead at 9:50 a.m.
An examination of the judge's body by Dr. W.H. Slattery was done shortly before noon that day. It showed that the bullet that killed the judge entered a little to the right of the center of his chest, glanced off of his collarbone, severed one of the main arteries, and caused massive internal hemorrhaging.
After the exam, the judge's body was moved to Castle, Roper, and Matthew Mortuary.
Back in the courtroom, court reporter Minor Bacon sat in his chair, stunned.
I was just shot, and at point blank range. I was right next to him. I looked down the barrel of his pistol. I don't feel anything. I must be dead.
Minor began to slowly feel around his body and inside of his suit jacket where he'd been shot. The force of the bullet fired at him was spent when it had plowed its way through a slim 15-page leather-bound notebook that he always carried in his breast pocket. He rose from the chair and rushed into the judge's private office. Minor found the bullet in his upper right-hand upper vest pocket. He had been informed that no trace of the bullet fired at him could be found in the courtroom, but there it was. The bullet had penetrated his suit jacket and his vest pocket where the notebook had stopped it. Minor discovered a small scratch on his breast, which was the extent of his injuries.
Wow, can you believe that? It sounds like that notebook saved Bacon's bacon.
Right, Rick? And speaking of close calls, remember that shot that was intended for Melinda?
Mm-hmm.
It whizzed right past her, the doomed woman, and her attorney. It flew so close by her attorney, in fact, it left a slight powder burn on Clifford's cheek before coming harmlessly to rest in the window shutters in the back of the courtroom. And luckily, it also missed two gentlemen, I should say, that were seated right behind them. Following the tragedy, her attorney, Rain Clifford, was suffering from shock, nervous shock. He had to go home and rest.
Another judge, Judge Stewart, called colleague Judge Letton as soon as he had received word that the shooting had taken place, all before the news of the murder was publicized.
Mrs. Morning was notified almost immediately after the tragedy by her neighbor, Mrs. Charles Letton, the wife of Judge Letton. Mrs. Letton reported that Mrs. Morning took the shock very bravely. Judge Stewart, who later visited the home, stated to the newspapers that Mrs. Morning seemed dazed. After Mrs. Letton gave Mrs. Morning the shocking news of her husband's death, she then telephoned the school where Judge Morning's daughter Mildred was a teacher and asked the school principal there to relay the message to Mildred. She returned home immediately upon hearing the news.
Oh, all the phone lines in Lincoln must have just been burning up with the news.
It was big news, no big deal. Unaware of the bloodshed that took place at the courthouse, the second Mrs. Wallach, Ethel, had waited patiently for Wallace's return to the library until well past noon. Growing tired of waiting, she left the library and went to the home of her friend, Mrs. Albee, who lived on South 8th Street. After a very long search, Deputy Sheriff Longstretch found her there. Excuse me, Mrs. Albee, is there a Mrs. Wallach here with you?
Why, yes. Please come in. Ethel, Sheriff Longstretch is here to see you.
Hello, Sheriff. What is it? What can I do to help you?
Mrs. Wallach, your husband is Wallace Grant Wallach, is that correct?
Why, yes, officer. He was supposed to meet me at the library hours ago, but he never came back for me. What is it? Is he okay? What's going on?
Mrs. Wallach, there's been a shooting at the courthouse this morning. Your husband killed Judge Morning, and he injured others. And I'm sorry to tell you, but your husband is dead. He took his own life.
No, it can't be. Not my Wallace. No!
Mrs. Wallach, did you know your husband had 2 guns in his possession this morning?
No, not Wallace. He didn't have any guns. I'm sure of it. He did not have guns in our room at Mrs. McKee's. I wonder why he did it. He acted just as he always has since we were married, less than a month ago. We have never spoken of anything like this.
Ethel collapsed to the floor. When the sheriff's deputies examined Wallace's body back at the courthouse, they removed an envelope from his pocket of the self-proclaimed tunnel contractor. It contained personal letters, the citation for contempt of court, a Burlington Railroad timetable, and 25 cents. As for the papers that Wallace had placed on Judge Morning's desk just before he fired the fatal shot, well, they just disappeared. No one could find them in the excitement.
What, really?
Yeah, some people said off record that they might have been his last words or his suicide note.
Oh, it's too bad those papers vanished.
But don't you think it was a little convenient?
What do you mean, Martha?
Well, it's almost as if they didn't want the murderer to have the last word.
Still, what I would give to read what he wrote.
Ditto.
The guns at Wallace fired that morning were both hammerless 38 caliber short barrel 6-shooters. One of the weapons carried 3 discharged shells and the other but one. It was from the bullet that Wallace fired on himself.
Let's take a commercial break. And let's hear from another one of our sponsors.
Castle, Roper, and Matthews, located at 1317 North Street in Lincoln, is the most perfect and complete institution of its kind in all of New York. The members of our firm are all practical undertakers, good businessmen, and courteous gentlemen. We carry a large and complete stock of caskets and burial goods, and operate branch houses at College View, University Place, Waverly, Raymond, Pleasantdale, and Eagle. We are doing the most extensive undertaking business in all of Nebraska. We are all right people, individually and collectively. We hope to see you at Castle, Roper, and Matthews soon. What follows,
Extra, read all about it.
what follows in this part of tonight's presentation are headlines and articles from the Lincoln State Journal and other local papers.
Headline: He acted queerly for a long time.
Believed that he had intended killing the Rector family.
Had 6 children by first wife. Here's what the actual newspaper said. In an interview Monday noon with M. Wallach in the company of her brother Charles Rector and her father Charles, the statement was made that Wallace G. Wallach, murderer of Judge Morning, had been acting strangely for some time. He had been very secretive about his actions in all personal matters. Everett Rector, who narrowly missed death from a bullet directed at him by Wallach, said he believed that the shooting of Mrs. Wallach and members of her family had been previously planned by Wallach, who at different times demonstrated his ability with a revolver while about the house and making the statement that no person could force him to do anything against his will. No motive is known by members of the family as to why he shot Judge Morning. Mrs. Wallach said that Mrs. Ethel Hanson, who married Wallach recently in Council Bluffs, is not the first woman he has been implicated with in his personal affairs. It was because of his escapades with other women that separation and divorce resulted. Previous to the first of these affairs, he had given every attention to his wife and family. Mrs. Wallach gained the first knowledge of her husband's affairs with other women when she found letters that she found about their house from women who she was not acquainted with.
There were 6 children in the Wallach family: a son, Raymond, who died in camp during the World War, a daughter, Edna, 18 years old, who was seated beside Everett Rector at the time of the shooting, and 4 other smaller children.
This is actually incorrect. There was one younger child, Alice, and the remaining children were all older and adults. We found through all of our research that newspaper reporting was frequently incorrect, counting the number of the children wrong, ages wrong, but we're correcting it here to avoid confusion. The article went on to say, the shooting comes close upon another tragic incident in the lives of the Rector family. Mrs. Charles Rector, mother of Mrs. Wallach, died at her home, 2445 Randolph Street, February 11th, 1 week prior to today's tragedy. Charles Rector, father of Mrs. Wallach, is employed by the Lincoln Telephone and Telegraph Company. Everett Rector is employed by Wallach Electrical Works, the proprietor of which is Emmett Earl, son of Wallace G. Wallach.
Mrs. Ethel Hanson, who recently married Wallach in Council Bluffs, gave her home as being Ithaca, New York. She was 50 years old and is reported as having been married 3 times before.
Another mistake, because we figured it out, and she was about 61 years old about when she married Wallace. It went on to say, Mr. Wallach has been doing cement and well digging work about Lincoln for several years. He dug the tunnels for the Burlington at Lancaster Water Station during the past year and did much of the cement work for the company there. He was regarded as a good workman, but those who had to deal with him towards the end of the work at the Lancaster pump station said that he got so that his word could not be depended upon and that he seemed a bit erratic. He was not regarded, however, as unbalanced mentally.
The flag over the courthouse hung at half-staff on Tuesday to indicate in some way the grief of Judge William M. Morning's associates and courthouse employees. The courtroom in which the judge was killed was closed and locked. Hung on the door was a black wreath and a black bordered card bearing the legend, "Closed on account of the death of District Judge W.M. Morning." The county commissioners met on Tuesday morning and stated that the courthouse would be closed Wednesday afternoon so that all county employees might attend the funeral. Floral tributes arrived all day Tuesday from all over the state. The usual buzz of activity was lacking, and those in the courthouse spoke in hushed tones as if in the presence of the dead. The shock felt by the friends and co-workers of the slain judge was painfully visible, and their faces were drawn from lack of sleep.
I didn't sleep but 20 minutes last night.
A.A. Lang, bailiff in Judge Morning's court, said. Telephone calls were answered all day from across the state, inquiring about the details of Wednesday's funeral. It was thought that attorneys and dignitaries from all over the state would be in Lincoln for the services.
Charles Wayland Bryan was an American businessman and politician who served as the 20th and 23rd governor of Nebraska and mayor of Lincoln, Nebraska, and was the Democratic nominee for vice president in 1924. He was the younger brother of William Jennings Bryan.
Can you remind me of who that was?
Sure, Rick. William Jennings Bryan was an American lawyer, orator, and politician. He was a dominant force in the Democratic Party, running 3 times as the party's nominee for president, and he did serve as Secretary of State for Woodrow Wilson. The then Governor Bryan was much moved when he received word on Monday afternoon of the tragic death of Judge W.M. Morning. The governor was a close personal friend of the judge and was much interested in Morning's work as a judge in the juvenile court and domestic relations.
I have not learned the details.
Said Governor Bryan.
But it was a great shock to me. It was undoubtedly the work of a madman.
Judge Morning's murder was a painful shock to the community. His wife, the former Grace Stewart, had always been prominent and highly regarded in the community. Judge Morning was well known and enjoyed a reputation, as the newspapers said, quote, he was a man of affairs.
Man of affairs, I mean, does that mean he was like a philanderer?
No, Rick, no. A man of affairs is a term that means like a businessman or someone who's commercially successful. He was definitely a man of means. Huge crowds attended the viewing, funeral, and interment of Judge William Morning on Wednesday in Lincoln, Nebraska. The judge was laid to rest in Wyuka Cemetery. Funeral services for Wallace Grant Wallach were held at 2 p.m. on Thursday at the Henry B. Brown Chapel and officiated by Reverend J.W. Hilton. We don't know who attended the funeral or who submitted the lengthy obituary that was printed in the newspaper, but people's interest in the case was morbidly high, and we can guess that many folks showed up at the funeral to gawk. Wallace was also buried in Wyuka Cemetery in Lincoln, Nebraska, in an unmarked grave.
So are you telling me that the murderer and the victim were laid to rest in the same cemetery?
Exactly. But it's probably because both families had family plots there, so that's where they would go.
The public was simply obsessed with the crime. Newspapers in Lincoln for weeks published stories of the shocking murder and consequent suicide. They followed up on any lead they could find, even to the point of harassing and even misidentifying a Lincoln resident by the name of Wallace W. Wallach as the murderer. And if you remember, our guy was Wallace Grant Wallach with a G. Reporters questioned town officials in Yuma, Colorado, where Wallace had claimed he resided, but officials were unable to find a trace of Wallace's reported residence there, although they said that he may have had relatives in the region. I bet that was huge news. I mean, can you imagine? I'm sure it was a talk all over Lincoln.
Yeah, from all the research we did and people, that were reporting things, I guess people were just going crazy. Reporters were chasing down any story they could find, harassing all the families that were involved, and obviously harassing families that weren't even involved. But here's an amazing newspaper story that we found that was printed in the days following the murder-suicide. But this is about Wallace's sister, Sarah Ellen. So the headline, big bold headline read, Wallach's sister adjudged insane. And the next headline says, died in state hospital last year after being there since 1914. Next headline, was subject to hallucinations, but never became violent. And then the article says, Miss Catherine Odell, and then here's a place where they misnamed her. Her name was Sarah Ellen. Sister of Wallace G. Wallach, died February 19th, 1923 in the State Hospital of the Insane. She was committed to the institution on November 18th, 1914, and according to officials of the asylum, was subject to hallucinations during which she fancied herself as an opera singer. She also thought of herself as being on an intellectual plane higher than the ordinary person. The article goes on to say, her insanity was of a very mild form.
Wow, insanity ran in that family, huh?
Well, remember back then, women could be institutionalized for just speaking up their minds or talking back to a man.
Those were the days, Aaron.
Hey, I want to talk to the manager.
Melinda was now sharing the family home on Benton Street with her son Charles and his wife Lucille and her younger daughter Edna. Charles and Lucille had a son, Charles Henry, or Joe Wallach Jr., who would have been 2 at the time, so it must have been a really tight fit for the family in a 1,000 square foot bungalow. Because their home address had been published multiple times, locals drove past their home at all hours of the day and night, and reporters pounded on their door, hoping for an interview. Every day for months, the newspapers kept publishing stories that had any connection to the murder and the people involved. As we said already, the public just couldn't get enough of this story. The Wallach family stayed close and private, most living within blocks of Melinda, and they all pitched in to help their mother. Son, Wallace Roy, the 3rd eldest, who now lived in LA, changed his name to Roy. It's remarkable, that name change.
It's kind of sad when you think about it. You know, he was an adult man, but he gave up his given name because of the shame of his father and to distance himself from the crime and maybe even just to escape the press. So interest in the case seemed to quiet down towards the end of the year, but the Wallach family was now treated differently, and they were shunned by many in their community. The next year, and year after year afterwards, on the anniversary of the murder and the suicide, local papers would recall the tragic event in their headlines, and reporters again hounded the Wallachs, hoping to get a photo or an interview or just to get something from the family of the insane murderer. And again, the curious would visit their house where the family lived, driving by the house all hours of the day, night, honking their horns, yelling, screaming, and creating a frightening environment. 7 years went by, 7. And at times, public scrutiny was unbearable for the Wallach family. They just couldn't stand it anymore. So eventually, the family made the decision, with the urging of Roy, to join him in Southern California. So in 1931, the family, everyone except daughter Millie, made the journey to Los Angeles County, California. The matriarch of the family, Melinda, led the exodus.
Vowing to make a complete change and leave the past behind her, and make sure the scandal did not follow her to California, Melinda, who was 62 at that time, began using her legal first name, Martha. So her name was Martha and not Melinda?
Yep. Her name was Martha Melinda Rector Wallach.
Wait, isn't that your name?
Yes. My name is Martha Melinda Querin-Schultz. And Martha Melinda was my great-grandmother. Her youngest son, Emmett, was my grandfather, my mom's dad.
New lives were established, babies were born, houses and homes were built and purchased, and the Wallach family grew and thrived, leaving behind the tragedy and scandal of February 18, 1924 in Lincoln, Nebraska.
This is the story of my family and my great-grandfather, Wallace.
Stick around for the show at 9.